I wanted to leave the country to devote to studying the bass more profoundly. The idea of teaching really was always in the back of my mind.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath. So glad to have you here today. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what's going on here. And send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Introduce yourself. Let me know what's going on in your life. Let me know a suggestion for the show, a guest, any news you've got coming up. And the best way to do that is feedback at contrabassconversations.com. And we're digging into teaching this week. This whole week we've been covering teaching from different perspectives. We've been talking private lessons, public school teaching, and university level teaching. And also teaching with a long-term focus and focusing on the complete musician. You can learn more about teaching in general, what I've learned from this podcast at contrabassconversations.com/teaching. And I'll be updating that resource going forward. So share with colleagues, share with friends, let me know something that I should add. I'd love to make this as useful for the greater bass community as possible. And you're going to love today's conversation with George Amorim. George teaches bass at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And I've known George for years. We both were involved with the Chicago Bass Festival for several years, and we've kept in touch ever since. And I got a chance to hang out with him in Prague for Bass 2016. George was performing with a quartet consisting of himself and three of his students. And this quartet played an awesome recital consisting of two pieces. One was an arrangement of Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf by George's UT RGV colleague Justin Reiter. And the other piece, which you'll hear excerpts from, is called Canto de Zango. And that was written by Gabriel Preusse, one of George's students. And this quartet is actually published and available for purchase. And I'll have a link in the show notes where you can contact Gabriel about it. George has built an amazing bass program in South Texas. And what's even more amazing is that when George was hired, there were 0 students, not one bass student. Can you imagine being hired to teach bass and having 0 students? And not to mention that this region of Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, Edinburgh and McAllen, where George is centered, but this whole area is vast, and no bass students at the university. So where do you even begin? How do you go from having 0 students to what they've got there now, what George has built now, which is a vibrant studio, amazing players from young through high school into college. It's a thriving double bass scene. So how did that happen? And that's what we get into. The cool thing is that just as I was about to talk with George, the latest Bass World journal, the ISB journal, arrived, and there's an article written by George titled A Pyramid Scheme, the Good Kind. And this details the steps that he took to build this bass program. So if you're an ISB member, check out the latest journal. You'll have it and read along, and you'll learn a little bit more about this process. A big part of building the bass program revolved around the Viva el Bajo festival that George started. So we dig into that, how he got it going, and the long-term impact it had on the double bass scene in South Texas. And so many takeaways from our conversation. I've experienced what George is describing at my job at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and George is providing a great blueprint for how you can grow your own double bass scene, no matter where you're located. I'd also like to thank D'Addario Strings for sponsoring this podcast and let you know about their Zyx strings, which come in 2 tensions. They're medium and light. They're great hybrid strings. They're great for arco playing. They're great for pizzicato playing. I'm using them right now, and I'm really enjoying them. They're made in the United States, designed, engineered, and crafted at the D'Addario String Factory in New York. So check them out, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. All right, here we go with our conversation with George Amorim. So set the scene for us. You're walking into this job, and what did it look like? What were you walking into?
Actually, it was what could you possibly see as the worst possible thing. Like, you've done a lot of this. You've done a lot of clinics and classes and workshops. And, when you walk into a scene where nobody knows their music, and then you're expected to somehow coach a section of bass players, and half of them don't have the music, the other half are just struggling. They don't, even though they may be in high school, they don't know much about the instrument. So you have to make an executive decision and say, no, this is not going to be of any help. To try and cover the music, you have to go back, okay, draw the bow this way, straight bow, hold, and then you start tackling the setup of students. So you go back to the beginning. So imagine that in a whole sense of a whole region, there was very little to work with in that sense, although there are hundreds of bass players that seemed interested and eager to do work and get better.
So you walk in there. What was your job title? Like, were you professor of double bass, but there weren't any double bass students?
Yeah, it was the position had been open like a lecturer. It was a position tied with a local symphony orchestra. So you had to play in the orchestra, and then you had to teach. But then there were no students to teach. And the cello professor back then was teaching a couple of students who were hanging around. And so there wasn't really much that I walked into. So I really saw that there was lots of hope in me. Like we know that for a university to go and take that step of hiring an actual bass instructor, it says a lot about what they need and what they understand to be the needs of a perhaps long-term kind of situation.
Now you fast forward, and I just was hanging out with George at Bass 2016 in Prague, and you listen to this bass quartet that he's got with 3 of his students. It's just unbelievable. I mean, they're playing 2 original works, or 1 original work by one of the students, and then an arrangement of Peter and the Wolf. It was just unbelievable. And one of the bass players had the evil task of playing the flute part and did a heck of a job. So it's just such an amazing performance. Can you maybe describe, now we fast forward, what you've got now at Rio Grande Valley?
Well, it's actually yesterday, as I was finishing typing up the program for the recital, I choked up because I thought, wow, we usually have these 2-hour studio recitals because there's a lot that these kids learn, and they learn really, really fast. And then I was 93 degrees outside, beautiful weather, and I said, gee, this is the best job ever. I can ask for anything better than that, because the whole situation, I'm talking 10 years later, it has become something that I really enjoy, and I see that things have caught traction and students are getting better quicker. And this is something that it's due to the number of students that are in the studio, so they have more than those couple of hours with me a week. They're in the practice building, helping each other out, playing together, doing drills, and it shows between lessons that there's a dynamic within the students.
So you're faced with what people must think is an impossible task. I mean, you're in this vast region of South Texas. Just set the scene of the region and what it looks like, and Edinburgh, and just what the school community is like.
Well, the university is set in Edinburgh. And then Edinburgh is just, it's the same city as McAllen, but it's technically a different town. And there is Edinburgh, McAllen, which is the one that everybody, oh, you mean McAllen? Yeah, South Texas, yeah, that's the town that people recognize. And then there's Spar and Mission. These are 4 big towns, and we spread across. This is the Rio Grande Valley, and we're on top of it, and we go all the way to Brownsville. And there's the border region, like we go across the border, and then there's about I don't know, maybe 400,000 or 500,000 people on the other side. And Reynosa, it's a pretty big city. And they have also a pretty strong, interesting music. They have conservatories, they have private schools, and a lot of our students either commute, they are commuter students, international commuter students, or they simply move up here. But when I first got here, all we could find were taquerias around here in Edinburgh. A lot of changes have taken place within the university in terms of where we're going, what this institution is about. So we're in our full second year of the merger we had with the UT Brownsville. So we were UT Pan American, we merged with UT Brownsville. So all of a sudden we became a much larger university with about 30,000 students. And McAllen was always the big city. Go out, go to restaurants. But Edinburgh has grown to become a college town. We have cafes and art galleries and lots of events here hosted by the city, the mayor's office, and then their arts foundation in Edinburgh. So we're pretty good on our own. I do live in McAllen, but Edinburgh is really charming and on purpose, very rural. It's pretty nice. Our campus is beautiful and lots of native vegetation and really well kept.
So George, and this is great timing that we're talking about this, I just got the most recent Bass World from the International Society of Bassists, and there's an article by George called Pyramid Scheme, The Good Kind, and it's all about how he built this program over the years. Can you talk us through how you built this bass program?
Well, I think was one of really good things that happened when I first came. There was a string quartet from another university up in Corpus. They came down here to do recruiting. They had just established a good quartet scholarship program, and they didn't have a bass guy, and we got introduced by mutual friends, and they invited me to join them. Felt a little weird because they were from another university and I was from here, but let's just to play Dvorak Quintet. Said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And that week we got to visit the whole Rio Grande Valley, from here to Harlingen and Brownsville. And in that week, I got to see over 100 bass players in a workshop, a masterclass situation, and all kinds of kids, all kinds of level, but nothing that you'd call home about. And that was alarming in that sense, but intriguing. Like, wow, so many kids, so many schools, so many orchestra programs. And between here, like we have 16 high schools just in the Upper Valley. And then we have probably 25 high schools total. And it's easy to imagine the number of string students in the area, like by the thousands, hundreds of bass players. So when I did get to see those things, those kids, I had to start tackling it little by little, but it didn't really work because everybody got word that I wasn't here. So I just got calls and calls, please come over. And then people would assume that I would be their trusted help to kind of rescue and bring their students wherever they needed to be. But it was just a daunting task. It couldn't really be done in a quality way. And then there was no way that I could simply elect a school or pick and choose who I was going to see. So it didn't take a long time for me to realize that I had to call them into our campus. So I started an open bass class and like literally an open call. And we had, I think, a little over 40 bass players show up in the first one from all over. And like some teachers bus them from 25, 30 miles away. And I remember one of the orchestra directors, she was maybe 2-3 weeks from delivering, like she was a term, and she was riding the bus with these kids, like really pushing them. And so I saw that people, they really rose to the challenge, and they came to help and then see what this was about and see how the students reacted, how students received the whole proposal.
Oh, that's cool. And for an open bass class, I mean, 40 bass players, that's remarkable. And folks listening, Texas just has a reputation for excellence in orchestra programs, and South Texas, I'm assuming, is the same way. Is that true?
Yes, it is. And many years ago, I was writing a paper for school, and then I received some data. It's probably outdated by now, maybe over 10 years ago. But it stated that Texas has more string students than the rest of the country combined, which is remarkable. And then it's not a surprise in a sense when we attend our state convention. And then we see it's just overwhelming. It's awesome.
Viva el Bajo, when did the Bass Festival come into existence? How did that happen?
in 2008. 2000 was my second spring here. And then I had realized that a lot of the things that I was proposing, I needed to implement, were kind of received with a little bit of skepticism, because who's this guy coming from, I don't know, up north, let's say, and getting our kids to do these drills, and what about the music, the contest music? They're not learning the contest music, and they're just doing these scale drills and technique drills. And so I really needed to expose the area to other people, to other professionals that had similar views and had gone through the same kind of process of implementing something where there was very little. And then Jeff Reditich came to my mind. He graciously accepted my invitation, and he came down. It was something very small, like the university didn't sponsor in any ways, and I had to go out and I used my own personal resources, miles, and one of our local businesses stepped up and took care of taking care of our guests in terms of his fee. And then we had a really, really good turnout. Like, we had over 80 students coming, and it was quite overwhelming. We had to go to the student union because our building back then was not capable of accommodating all these kids. And you know what? More than two bass players is a crowd, right? And so especially when you're dealing with little kids who are not really used to being careful with the instrument, what they put, and then sometimes when you have 80 bass cases piled up, and then now we have to try and put them all back together at the end of the day. And so it was really an adventure. And the day after, the weekend, I thought to myself, it was the first and last. I'm never going to do this. And of course, I wasn't too convinced about it, because it's going on to its 10th edition now, May 2017. A lot happened.
What a great idea to get somebody like Jeff Radovich involved. If anybody knew how to organize a bass festival, it'd be Jeff. And I went to his master classes when they were at Northwestern back when I was in high school. And how has the bass festival evolved over the years?
Well, the festival was pretty much a guest recital and master classes by the same guest artist. And for the first one, actually, Jeff, we were able to drag along Sonia Ray. I didn't know her, and she came along and she did take care of the youngest kids. And it was really cool. Like, she had very good interaction with them. And we had Jeff's recital. So it was just a master class. And it was really interesting because a lot of these young kids did not know what to do. So they would be sitting in a master class, but they're not playing. So they're not really getting much out of it in that sense. Even when it was the master class for them by Jeff or Sonia, it was a new kind of environment. So we were able to read that and make adjustments for the following year, like trying to cater and to adjust the activities and the offerings geared towards our younger students. Even students who are not that young, they're in high school, but they are not up there technically. So they need a little more time, they need a little more individualized attention, and sometimes maybe ensemble music that will get them that involved.
Well, yeah, and at the university level, you might think, oh, well, I really want to be targeting the high school kids because that's who's going to be coming to the school. But really, if you can get those young people in and have a long-term relationship with them, that's so powerful. I mean, I remember looking at a photo of this little guy, a student of mine at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater Bass Festival, and now he's in the Lyric Opera. So you just don't know where someone's going to end up.
We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen, what they're going to turn out to be, whether they're going to continue playing the bass. And one of the kids that we do have like pictures of him playing for Jeff when he was a beginner, and he was playing one of those Suzuki books tunes, and we were all proud of him because he was up there and playing. And a few years later, he won the concerto competition in his high school, and I sent Jeff a video of him performing. I said, "Kid's come a long way since Minuet won. I mean, it's priceless. That's what makes us go out again and do it and promote another event, because and not really take the little kids that may have a trouble sitting down through a master class when they're 12, maybe we just need to keep doing, and then they come next year, and then the next year, and the following year, and eventually they'll get it.
Well, it's so amazing to see those changes. You know, one year the kid is 4 feet tall, and then the next year you see them and they're 6 feet tall. It's just amazing. In terms of going into the high schools, and you're talking about doing the technique classes and that kind of thing, what sort of materials do you like to use? What exercises do you do with those students?
Well, one thing that I like to use a combination of two resources. One is Jeff's Reditage's technique packet, because I start usually with 4-note progressive or shifting drills. And those things, they're not easy, but they're doable. And then you get students shifting right away, and then you anticipate that for students, especially middle schoolers, to whom shifting is a must within 2 weeks, because they have to be in the same class with violinists who are playing 2 octave scales without moving a finger, And for bass kids, it's really empowering when they feel like that they can move around the bass. And when they start playing together, that it just gives you goosebumps. And if it gives me goosebumps, I think it gets them pretty excited that they are, finally we sound together. Finally, we sound like a section. And then they're all doing a drill, and then you go around the room helping, fixing things. And I kind of throw a couple of buzzwords that usually gets them excited to enroll in technique class, to start taking private lessons. I talk a little bit about dexterity and tone production, and how just a few minutes doing the drill, they feel that they have a better control of how much force they use and the accuracy of their shifts. So I think those exercises are pretty effective, and they're really quick.
Yeah, I love those exercises. I mean, I use them and I practice them myself. They're great for group classes, and they fall into that category of simple but really deep. You can start out just very early students with those, and you can go for years on them, adding variations and getting deeper and deeper into them. And we talked about Jeff Braditage and some of your background, but can we rewind to your early years in music? Just tell us how you got started in music and where you grew up and those kind of details.
Well, my family was very musical. My dad is a Baptist minister, so we grew up doing all the church thing and the singing and choir. Very early, we were in conservatory, 6 or 7 years of age, taking theory, rhythmics class, and playing the recorder, piano, and then the guitar. That was the instrument that I played the longest, I guess. Just by the time I was in college, I was introduced to the bass. In my church, a music minister we had an orchestra, but no bass. She said, "Oh, you play the guitar, you're going to play this thing." And I was already doing other things with my life, pursuing a degree in business and working in a bank. It was pretty exciting. Not really, actually. It was carrying the bass and dealing with swinging doors and not really having much of direction to go. But one thing did happen. It was really a big change. One of my friends in church, she went to a festival, and she started dating this guy, a bass player. And he came to visit her, and she brought him to church, and he came to talk to me. And that guy he probably doesn't remember that, or doesn't even know how important it was, that meeting, and then to see him and witness his playing. And then along the years, he did help me a lot. He actually studied here in the States, and he's back in Brazil. He plays in the Brazilian Symphony Orchestra. He's just a tremendous player. And he was really inspiring person in my life as a bass player. And from that point on, I went to the same festival, and I got to meet my first real bass teacher, the São Paulo State Orchestra, Sergio de Oliveira. Amazing. He studied at Berlin Academy, just a great musician. And from that point on, I started collecting experiences and meeting different teachers and playing professionally with a couple of orchestras in Brazil, and traveling, going to festivals. So all of that kind of happened quite fast. So I normally tell my students that don't try to get me to recognize anything from the 90s or pop culture, because I was just practicing. I was just buried in a practice room, just taking care of business. And I don't recall watching TV much or listening to music other than classical music. So that's how it was.
So you did your undergraduate schooling in Brazil, and then how did you find yourself in the States? How did that happen?
One was this friend, Valdir, because he had, shortly after we met, he moved to the States. And I agreed with a lot of things that he did and a lot of things that he was looking for. And it took me a few years to feel that I would be ready to make that move. And the time I spent in Brazil was very, very important. Learning repertoire, playing a lot of different music every week with orchestras and playing ballets and operas and different conductors every week. So it was a very, very important time in my life. In the mid-90s, I came to spend some time with Milton Masiadri at the University of Georgia. He had this exchange program. Very, very neat. And Milton's just a great guy. Takes care of business, takes care of people. Just a phenomenal player. So he really helped kind of set me in the direction of making a decision, because most of my bass mates out there in Brazil would choose the route of going to Europe. And for some reason, I was more inclined to move to the U.S. And that visit, that time I spent with Milton in Georgia, during that time I got to meet Ed Barker and attending one weekend of masterclasses of his. And I was really, really impressed with his approach to teaching and how pragmatic the way of talking about the bass and technical matters and in order to achieve musical goals. It just kind of clicked because I was always very brainy, like a math kind of mind, and that really hit a nerve. And then I thought to myself, I think I will get what I need if this is the American way of teaching. And through the years, I got to play for different people that had similar approach, very different than the European approach, which wasn't my favorite way of thinking. And then I felt very at home the way that Ed Barker, Milton, and Larry Wolf, some of these guys would say things, and it made so much sense, and it felt very democratic in that sense that, I can learn that too. And maybe a year later, I met Robert Black. I really, really enjoyed working with him there in Brazil, and we agreed that I should come and move to Hartford and go to school at Hart School and work with Robert. That was a really good time I had up there. It was a time of opening my mind up for a lot of different things and how to think of music and how to think of collaborative arts. To participate in some projects with him. Great studio, great students, and was very inspirational. But it was like breaking barriers, the common sense of traditionalism and all of that. And Robert is not traditional, so it was really, really good to work with him and have those experiences. And some of those things, they actually have a lot of influence in what the things I do now and the work I do with the bass ensemble, the quartet.
Well, and Robert's somebody that I think when you hear the name Robert Black, you think of contemporary music, but he doesn't just play contemporary music. I mean, he can really do anything.
He's good at everything. You put it right. Yeah, it's just, I've heard him play a lot of the traditional repertoire, and always mind-blowing, and his calm and nurturing ways were very, very effective. So I really appreciate the time that I spent out there with them.
Your undergrad was in business. Do you remember why business? What inspired you to get into business?
That was because in Portuguese we say administration, right? And it's business/business. So it was the first one on the list. So let's go with this. No, actually, I did, and back in the day, they would do this vocational testing with you saying, maybe you should do this. And then every time I did that, it would pop music. But where I grew up, it was one of the many capitals in Brazil that are on the ocean and beach life. And classical music wasn't really that present or important in terms of, I grew up around like church music and playing in church. So the whole idea of pursuing music as a career was really foreign. It had no appeal to me. And I always liked math. And then I did a lot of accounting and stock brokerage and all of that working at a bank. And I really enjoyed it. And maybe some of that helped me not freak out with some of the things that are involved with organizing a large bass event and budget and sponsors and all of those things. So that was a good time in my life too.
When you can see those business characteristics, there's not being afraid to start things and that kind of thing. in what you've done down in Texas and in the university job, and then also with the Bass Festival. What inspired you to become a university teacher? When did that idea come into your mind?
Actually, it always did. I've always taught since I was a teenager. In church, teaching guitar, teaching Sunday school for little kids. And so I always had I was very comfortable teaching. I've always been comfortable. But while in Brazil working in two different orchestras, maybe 8 years old, I always had students. But students, the relationship was a little different. It felt more like a consulting. Didn't have like your pupils. They would come to you for time, like if they were preparing for a competition or to enter one of the youth orchestras or to get into whatever universities. So that teaching, it felt more meeting the students' immediate needs rather than proposing an actual line of work or a philosophy of work. It was more like this immediatist kind of relationship. So it wasn't bad. It's just, it felt that it was a little empty in that sense. And when I moved to the States, I just wanted to focus on cleaning things up, organizing things up. And then it took me a few years to finally say, yeah, I want to do this. I want to teach. But that was actually my first motivation. I wanted to leave the country to devote to studying the bass more profoundly in order to be able to, because I had done the orchestral thing and it's priceless. It was priceless, sitting every day, having to be there every day and sometimes for 2 or 3 services and having to be ready to play different music, different conductors all the time for most of the year. And the idea of teaching really was always in the back of my mind. I took a few years between Hartford and my second stop in the States was in Waco. And when I was leaving Hartford, a couple friends threw a going away party. And everything that I hear, even as I was driving off from my apartment the following day with the car packed up, they're like, oh, be careful. They carry guns and, you never know. But they were seriously and concerned about my well-being. And I said, remember, I'm Brazilian. And I'm used to the rough environment. And to my disappointment, it wasn't like that at all. Texas, people were just lovable and very loving and welcoming. So I moved to Texas. I went to Baylor, studying there for 2 years under Christopher Buttle, another fantastic bass player, as amazing as shy. So I kind of had to prod him to show me tricks and all of that. But I kind of got him playing for me, and then I appreciate that time. That school was amazing for me. Like, they took care of me. It was a great experience, a great time to regroup, learn repertoire and play recitals and perform soloing with orchestras. And then that was a very productive time.
Man, talk about being locked in the practice room. To go from not playing bass to soloing with an orchestra in just a few years. Wow.
And so I felt really, really comfortable in Texas. I really liked it. I really liked the roads, that I could go anywhere. I could just hop in my car and go anywhere. And even though Texas is extremely large and sometimes discouraging to actually hit the road and drive somewhere out of state, but it was a good place for me to stop. It was Waco. It was very good because the facilities at Baylor were just phenomenal. The orchestra program there was just outstanding, and the professors were absolutely super committed, like full-time faculty, and that really painted the picture of what Texas could be. And then it really, really helped me make my decision a couple years later when I was looking for a DMA program. I had met Jeff sometimes before my applications were due. And I auditioned for several schools, but I really had my eyes set in North Texas for 3 reasons. First being Jeff, because we hit it off. The second reason was that I would get to stay in Texas because there was a lot of gigging opportunities and great music scene out there in North Dallas. And the third one is that I was going to have a teaching fellowship, which was going to give me the opportunity to actually get back at teaching in a full responsibility way. Like, you had your office, you had your students. That was much more appealing than some other schools, great financial offers that did not involve teaching. So I think I hit the trifecta because having Jeff in Texas and being able to teach, I think I got it all at that time.
Well, you mentioned Jeff Bradage and lessons with Jeff. What were lessons with Jeff like?
Well, I wanted to exhaust every possible thing I needed to prepare. Come with everything possibly ready. And every time Jeff would surprise me and say, oh, but how about that fingering over there? Or how about this phrase over here? And then I would joke saying, come on, I worked, so hard. Make sure that I left no rock unturned. And then he would always have so much more to say. And this was very inspiring because it meant to me that no matter how hard and how much I worked, even though I was accomplishing a lot of different things, understanding that there was always something else. There was always something not in a frustrating way, but an exciting way, because it was always like a gift. And Jeff was always very generous with his knowledge, and he would just open up his books and here, this is what I do. This is what I've done. I've tried this, that, and later on I changed for this to this approach. So it was very matter of fact, like no nonsense lessons. And I had a great time at that school because it was all about figuring things out. And of course, being crowded out by the horde of amazing bass players everywhere. And you couldn't find parking, much less a locker. But those technique classes and the studio classes were just a diploma in itself. Every time you finished one of those classes, you had seen so much going on, so many insights, and such great playing coming from players all ages, all levels. There was no apology. He treated everybody the same way. He expected the same level of commitment, and students responded, and that was very invigorating to see like freshmen coming in like, wow, and see older students, more mature students have come out of working to go back to school, such as myself. So everywhere you turned, you had a lesson to be learned, and it was pretty good.
Well, that was one of the things about Jeff's masterclasses. I remember doing them, and they really had all comers. They had amateurs, they had college students, they had people that were on the verge of professional careers. It really was a cool environment to learn from all these different levels of people. So you've had this university job for a while, and you've built this program. And if you could remember back to getting the job, what were some of the most surprising things about life as a university professor for you?
Being on the same boat with other people, some younger, some older, and being expected to produce, to try to show results, and then having that evaluation done of your work every year. So in that sense, it was more of a passive mentoring, just observing and seeing what worked. And the university in that sense was pretty a great place, because since there were no bass players, no bass program, I wasn't filling anybody's shoes. There was no script or template to follow. So anything that I would implement or do, even though there'll be no money, but nobody ever stopped me. Like, oh no, you cannot use this facility, or you cannot have students come in. No, they were very, very open, and they backed me up. They endorsed the things that I was doing. So that, to me, was the greatest thing, not having to fill anybody's shoes. And I know that it makes, in a sense, to have that kind of situation, it means that you're coming into a job that necessarily, it did not exist before. So it's brand new. You don't know what is there. Start digging, and you could be onto something of gold, or just rock and keep going, and we never know. But I had being asked that by a couple of DMA folks pretty close to getting their degrees, what they should do. I said, do what? To get a job. Well, to get a job, you need to, first off, be where you need to be. Sometimes that where you need to be, other people don't want to be there, and then I'm sure other people would have turned down this offer because they may have realized that it would be too hard. When people ask me, I said, you've got to be willing to do the work that is needed to be done. So the field grows slower than the demand for work. There's so many more people graduating, so many more people with DMAs out there, but the full-time positions, we don't replenish them. People are retiring and then replace them with somebody else. But new positions are not being opened. I think people need to show, like if they get a adjunct position, a part-time position, to grow that into something bigger. But interesting enough, this can only, in my opinion, happen somewhere that it's a little isolated. Because if closer to a bigger city, there's always going to be that reserve of a lot of qualified people in the area that will be doing part-time teaching. And then you've addressed that plenty and with much, much better information than I have about adjunct professorships and all of that it's really hard.
Well, it's so fascinating when you look at these kind of things. If you look at the city of Chicago, how many full-time base professorships are there in Chicago? And I think the answer is 0. I think Andy Ricidi, he's playing in the Milwaukee Symphony coming down to Northwestern. Everybody else is in the Chicago Symphony or something like that. And, I was fortunate enough to teach at DePaul, but as a part-time person, but I was not growing the double bass program at DePaul. It was already great, but I did have this university job at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and I did grow the program. But if you look at it just as dollars and cents, what you have to do to grow the program, you are investing a lot of time into that job. And if you think of it just as I'm going to do what I'm getting paid for and go home, well, you're probably not going to grow something into something that you could then market to a university. What else could people do to stand out in the field? It's such a competitive field.
Well, and I say this when I work with the students in the methods class, there has to be something that you have to offer that isn't that other people can't offer. It's just that something that comes out of my mouth will ring in someone's ear in one way. And then the same thing is we see this all the time when we invite guests. Try to get a student to do something, and then comes this guest and boom, and all of a sudden, with the same words, but coming from somebody else's mouth, it sounds different, and then it rings a bell. So I tell some of the students, you need to find what is that you communicate the best. Like the things that you can say that they're going to stick. Because there are a lot of things that I can say that I'm just regurgitating things that I've learned. But if I have my own way of saying it and then it's tried and true, chances are that I can replicate that and it keeps happening. And if it does happen once, twice, then you can identify a pattern. And if it's a failure, it's identify a pattern of failure. And then you got to steer away from that. You got to go the other way. But if it's something that has had positive results, I encourage people to go for it. And for students, students in general, string players going into orchestral teaching, public school teaching. I just heard something on one of my favorite TV shows, Shark Tank. 2 girls saying, when we were in business school, we learned perhaps the thing that made us successful is that you don't really need to know everything. You need to be able to know where to find the best help. And as an orchestra director, that's usually the need. A lot of kids come out of school very eager to prove that they can teach violin, viola, cello, and bass, and as opposed to learning how to be a ringmaster, learning how to bring people together and draw resources from different sides. And in my case, I was really alone, but I reached out to Jeff, and that was my endorsement. That was really important because I was no longer just somebody. Jeff said, like, this guy, I think he's okay. So do what he's telling you. For students who go to his summer camp and those things, they come back and my students start placing in the regional orchestra and becoming all of them, and making the regional orchestra bass section, and then all state orchestra and festivals, and travel abroad and performing with the orchestras, winning their concerto competitions. So being your worst critic is your biggest help. Like, before things come out of your mouth and there's no way to bring them back. So if you have this constant assessment, fixing, and execution, assessment, fixing, execution. You do that. It doesn't take long for it to become like a split-second process that it happens before things comes out of your mouth. And you see students reacting, executing things, and then doing it again and again and becoming a habit.
Well, that reflection and adjusting accordingly, it's just so important in teaching. And just putting yourself out there and developing those skills. I mean, it's just something that takes time. It's a good point.
To me, that's the thing that simplify or summarize what really made me want to hone my teaching skills in a way, because where I come from, teaching of music, it's very exclusive. At least it was back when I was a kid. Like, if you don't make it to this conservatory, or if you don't, year after year, your chances diminish drastically. And then, like, the art of imitation. Sometimes I felt that teachers were hoping that you could simply imitate what they're doing. That's the measurement of success. And I always thought that being unfair. So this whole idea that teacher teaches one way and students should adapt to that. And then this feels very authoritarian. I wanted something different. I grew up fighting the military dictatorship in Brazil, going to the streets and all of that. And that's something that I really appreciate about the teaching profession in the States. It's always being very open and democratic and with respect to the student. So I feel that it's my job to identify, have my core set of beliefs and things I believe students need to know, and find ways of communicating it in the best possible way to each and every student. They all are different, and hoping for not seeking, actually aiming at the same result. Because I tell students, this is like a buffet. I put it all day. You guys are being fed the same thing. But I'm not going to tell you necessarily that I'll bring you to the buffet and then I'll tell you what all these things are for and where you're going to find your nutrients. But whether you make yourself take home box, and I don't know whether you're taking it, you're using it, it's not going to take too long. Next week I will know. So I used to have a suggestion on how much time students should practice in my syllabus. And about 6 years ago, I removed that because there are students, I want students to grow a sense of independence, and I want them to have a sense of consequence. If they come and then they don't have a good lesson, and I'm strict, but I'm fair. If they're not having a good lesson, then I can read whether that it's poor preparation or something else is going on. And if it's poor preparation, they're going to have a bad feedback that this is a perfectly good lesson that you threw away, and then you need to make sure that your money is used the best possible way. Don't waste time, don't waste money. And then we have studio class every week where they get to perform pretty much every other week. So there's the pressure is on. We have midterm recital. We have 2 recitals, full recitals a semester. You have to perform in orchestra. You have to play for the orchestra stuff, and so that kind of thing puts pressure on, and then they need to be up to par with what everybody else is doing. And some really students who are not that accomplished or developed, it's really interesting just how much they grow just by being around other students who are just like in the grinding mill and putting the hours, and that kind of vibe is what I had at North Texas, and it did so much good for me. And then I'd like for them to experience similar situations.
George, so great to talk with you. Check out George at georgeamorim.com. We have links to everything we talked about in the show notes. That's going to do it for this week focused on teaching. I love doing thematic weeks like this. We did an entrepreneur week earlier this year. I've done teaching focused weeks. I've done Gary Carr focused weeks. I have more ideas coming up in the future. I think it's kind of cool to weave these threads together into something that's kind of greater than the sum of its parts. Not that the parts aren't great in and of themselves, but that was the idea this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I love your feedback. You can email me at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. Let me know what you think, or if you have some other ideas for weeks like this. I know I have plenty, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Check out everything involving teaching, everything I've learned, everything I've covered in these hundreds of interviews at contrabassconversations.com/teaching. That is going to do it. I am going to go relax under the palm trees and not podcast for a couple of days. And we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.